Warning, this is a Halloween episode, and as such it will have jump scares and graphic imagery. Viewer discretion is advised. Last year's Halloween video I talked about why I didn't like horror games, and this year I want to answer a question that I never really got to in the last video. It's on the title screen, I don't want to be redundant. I'll admit right now, this is going to be more than just a little bit of a throwback to last year's episode, and the reason is that a lot of the message was, ironically lost in the style of my presentation, so we're going to try something a little more straightforward this time. So, first off, horror. The label covers a lot of ground, and I know I'm not going to be able to cover everything, so the pedantic among you can get the "you didn't talk about this" out of your systems now. There are plenty of horror folks on Channel Awesome who cover the breadth of the genre much better and much more thoroughly than I ever could. But my wheelhouse is video game culture, hence the title of this episode. Can you really make a horror-themed video game? I don't think so. Fear is when you think you're about to lose control. Terror is when you've lost control, and horror is when you realize you're not getting control back. That's going to take a bit of explanation. As long as you have control of your situation, you really can't be afraid. Hang on, I gotta go even further back than normal. Okay, so let's talk about classic horror stories. Let's take a look at the classic horror monsters. When you strip away the modern cartoonishness of them, what are they? They are unknown forces out of the protagonist's control, and it's the protagonist just trying to deal with it. For example, werewolves. They're normal humans who lose all control when the moon is full, and these stories are almost always told from the human perspective as they deal with this feral beast inside of them. And I say almost because there's a few werewolf stories where the person is in control and the horrors are infinitely more powerful than they are. Worgen in the World of Warcraft series, there you are. But the entire opening story arc of the Worgen was removing the horror of becoming a feral beast. So, okay, it's been a while, I don't know if it's changed. Actually, by contrast, the Forsaken opening arc was, well, you're dead, we made you come back, get over it. At least that was my takeaway from it. And that's actually another kind of horror, the dead. The Walking Dead, the Living Dead, dead people sewn together and animated, dead head smells. It's a staple of horror because people don't like the idea of not having control of their body post-mortem. This is why people plan their funeral so meticulously, because they want to have some control over death. And even then, what's to stop somebody from not granting your final wishes? What's to stop somebody from desecrating your body, or in a more supernatural sense, reanimating your body after you're dead? You don't get a say in it because you're dead. Why wait? A lot of horror stories are about being out of control while being fully conscious of that fact. Cross-reference the movie Johnny Got His Gun or the music video for Metallica's One if you're impatient. Any slasher flick is usually about a group of young normal kids trying to survive an uncontrollable force they just can't escape from. Or the Saw series of films. It's about normal people being given the illusion of controlling their fate when in all reality they have very little control. And in monster movies, you don't defeat the giant rubber lizard as much as you deflect it. Unless you're being directed by Roland Emmerich, I guess, but another story entirely. In all these cases, the horror comes from empathizing with the main characters who are not in control of their situation, and they have no idea how to defeat what they are presented with. We empathize because a lot of times we find ourselves out of control in our own lives. You got work, family, school, society. Demands are made upon us, and we start to feel helpless. So seeing that lack of control taken to an extreme makes it much more relatable. To that end, do we see horror films where we're supposed to empathize with the monster? Oh, okay, there are exceptions to the rule, but normally that means that the roles are reversed. King Kong was not in control of his situation when he fell off the skyscrapers, and Cordell was framed, so there you are. Okay, with that in mind, how do you piss off a gamer? With cutscenes. Final Fantasy VII. During this scene, how many people screamed, "But I have Phoenix Downs!" Yeah, it's a major plot point, but the scene is taken out of the player's hands. And because of that, because of the lack of the opportunity to try anything, it pissed off a lot of gamers. The controller was ripped out of our hands. Okay, granted, it's an important part of the story that Eris dies right here, but it makes us angry that we couldn't try to stop it, and even if we could fight it, if it was a foregone conclusion, we'd probably just let her die rather than waste our resources on something that's going to happen anyway, and then we'd complain that, well, it might as well have just been a cutscene. Gamers like a well-told story, but we hate it when we can't be a part of it, or when the story feels like it's being forced on us. Gamers want agency over our own game experiences. So, how much control do you actually have? Well, I can demonstrate this by saying that I've lied to you. Beginning of this episode, I put a disclaimer saying there's going to be jump scares and graphic imagery. yeah, there's not going to be any jump scares and graphic imagery. Now, having said that, how many of you up to this point have had your hand on the volume knob, ready to turn the volume down on a screamer? And how many of you have had your hand on the mouse, ready to scrub forward and skip all the nasty stuff? You have the control here, not me. The Outer Limits had it wrong. You can turn me off and walk away. You can read the comments and know what's coming, or on the other hand, you can lie in the comments about the jump scare and fool other viewers. I can't make you do anything. I can't even make you watch the rest of this video. That's out of my hands. As the end consumer of this video, you have the ultimate control. And the same goes for video games, because every horror game I've ever seen, the player still has agency over the outcome. You know, the bad guy can be defeated, and we go into the game knowing this. And besides, if we get stuck, you go online, you look for a walkthrough or a tip site, and after the first 24 hours after launch, there is no unknown. So with a walkthrough or a tip video series, there's no impossible. There's no horror. To that end, a horror game experience is like a good virtual reality experience. You've got to go through some elaborate steps to make it work. In virtual reality, it's a lot easier to see. Like this build from the Gadget Show on the BBC. To make it work, they hack Kinects, they use 360 treadmills, multiple screens, and paintball guns to give full immersion. And I'm going to cross-reference my VR show here. Horror games are basically the same. You have to dim the lights, you wear headphones so you can hear that lone string instrument playing on the soundtrack. We ignore the obvious build-up to the jump scare so that we can be surprised. Playing a classic game like Silent Hill in a well-lit room with the audio down is a totally different experience than playing in a dark room with headphones on. Even more so when you're playing with a friend who's already beaten the game telling you about everything's going to happen, or having a walkthrough on your tablet sitting right next to you. Somewhat related, last year somebody tried to convince me that Five Nights at Freddy's is a classic horror game, absolutely perfect horror game, and the way that they were describing it, it made it sound like it was red light, green light with an ear-destroying failure penalty, and that's just not horror. Okay, so what would make a true horror experience? Well, it would need some very specific components, and none of you would actually play it. So to be true horror, you would have to have a real loss of control and the knowledge of permanent loss. Spec Ops: The Line, okay, that was close, but it was presented as, well, it wasn't horror. Oh, it's another rant entirely. A true horror game would have to be almost like a computer virus. It would have to be invasive to your system and more than likely to the rest of your life. Imagine as you're playing this game, your hard drive just gets slowly wiped. Your pictures and all your files get corrupted. You know, stuff like that. And I'm not talking temporarily, I'm talking permanently. It probably also needs some ARG elements too, so that when you get up from the computer, it follows you on your smartphone. Oh, and it would probably have to prevent you from uninstalling it so you can't get out of it that easily. It'll have to block like outgoing calls so you couldn't call for help or look for stuff online. It would have to isolate you so it was only you versus the game, and you know eventually the game is going to win. The player would have to be left in the dark, flailing and panicking as their computer or console basically imploded on itself, and it wouldn't be fun, no matter how awesome the gameplay was. You see, this is why no sane person would ever play a true horror experience. It wouldn't be fun, so no, I don't think there's any game that could possibly be a true horror game. Now, that said, I'm reminded of a line in Something Wicked This Way Comes. The main bad guy gives our hero what he calls a taste of death, so he'll remember it when it comes. And I think this is the true purpose of the horror genre. Not necessarily to prepare us for something. I mean, the likelihood of a real zombie outbreak or finding a working puzzle box is probably pretty small. But at least get exposure to forces outside of our control? We fear the unknown, and knowledge is how we demolish that fear. You can only book learn so much before you have to go out and be exposed to uncomfortable things, and I think it's important that we do that. Horror games and films and novels, they all give us that safe space to approach what scares us, so that we're at least somewhat prepared for something milder when it comes by. Granted, it's not going to make you impervious to the heavy stuff, and that's fine. We experience fear in small doses, so we know what it feels like, so we know how we're going to react when it really hits us. Okay, as much as this is going to be a throwback to last year's video, this is really important to me because every year I see Halloween just get a little more sanitized, a little more family-friendly, and it just kills me a little because we need that exposure. We need horror games, we need Days of the Dead, and we need the macabre, and we need dark humor. We need Halloween to be creepy. It's the time of year we can approach the uncomfortable stuff about life and get to know it. If we don't do that, you get people who just can't handle reality when it gets too intense. So no, we can't have a true horror experience, but Why would you want one? No, instead we get a vacation into it, a taste. And to some extent, we need this in order to function in our everyday lives. So, this year, I want you to go ahead and break the veil. Turn down the lights a little bit. And do something that pushes you just a little bit out of your comfort zone. It's Halloween. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you like the show, give it a thumbs up. If you've got something to add, leave a comment in the comments section. Did you really like the show? You can subscribe absolutely free. And if you want to support what we do here, you can do so on Patreon, or now you can make a one-time donation through YouTube on our main page, or through the cards in the upper right-hand corner. Thank you again. And that's the take you're going to go with, because I'm not going to relight a burnt candle, because I'm not daft. Yeah, go ahead. Turn the candle so you can relight it for another take. That'll be good. Get hot wax all over your arm. That'll be fantastic. Yeah, yet another injury to add to the pile. Woo!